Welcome to another episode of Creative Leaders Unplugged. I'm Morgan with Arna, and today we're talking to Victor Udoewa, and we talk about a lot of things.
Well, yeah, and listened a lot too, which is really cool. So because he has such a, you know, beautiful way of articulating
Hmm.
himself and his ideas and his visions, and you can hear that he has a history of theater and yeah. Anyway, so I really
Yeah,
really
he's
enjoyed that.
a bit of a philosopher poet, and I really liked how he also kind of reframed or redefined. He talked about the difference between worlds and worldviews,
Yeah,
and that was something that I had never thought about before.
yeah, because he made it so explicit. I think I thought about it, but because this is again language, right? So
Hmm.
once someone says worldview and worlds, and there's a difference, your brain goes like, oh, well, what that? Because
Yeah.
because of the words, and all of a sudden you can talk about that, and it actually I think because you give it different words and different
Hmm.
labels, if you will, all of a
Hmm.
sudden it is different.
Yes, there's a
That's
phrase we would always say, naming is framing.
yeah, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So once he said it, he's like, then it was different.
Yeah.
Before
I
that,
can
it
never look
wasn't.
at worlds and worldviews differently.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not sure if it's a good conversation to have at parties because I think a lot of people are like, what are you talking about?
I don't know what kind of parties you go to, but I would
Yeah,
be.
well, seriously, I terrible at parties. I would because I would talk about these things at parties where nobody was interested in that kind of talking about
Okay, you're
because
not,
it's
yeah.
sounds like you're going to be this philosopher, which I'm not. Clearly I'm not a philosopher, but I want to be. I just want to be philosophers to sort of talking about the worlds and
Mhm.
world views and at a party where everybody's like, oh, come on, can we go dancing or something? And like, let's talk about this. I do that. I have an autistic side. We're talking about parties,
Uh-huh.
and language and words. I can't do chit chat. So
Okay.
right. So I really have a hard time chit chatting, and so my my wife is really good at this, and so just today, we're walking down the street with her dog, and
Mhm.
because he needs walks. Why? Why have a dog? Oh my God. Anyway, another topic. But anyway, I'm with my wife. So we're like at least we walk together. So
Mhm.
it has some use. So we walk together, walking the dog, and we see down the road one of the neighbors,
Mhm.
and and he likes to do so. He likes to chat,
Chit chat.
and I go like, oh God,
Oh no,
no.
walk on the other side of the street.
No. Because it's not going to be about the difference between worlds and worldviews. I would
Probably
like
not.
that.
Probably
No,
not.
it's going to be about, that he bought a boat and the thing he found in or
The
the,
weather was so good this
the
weekend,
weather and the
or yeah.
municipality, they planted this tree or they took down that thing and I went like, but my wife's really good at that. So I tell her like, please, because I need, can you keep it short?
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, which is weird because then I all of a sudden what ha happens is that because I'm embarrassed and I like him and it's nice and and he has
Of
stories,
course.
he has lots of stories. So I actually keep the conversation going and she's not answering questions or she's not adding things, and she was like,
Hmm.
I was quiet, you started, because I'm too, out
You
of
created
politeness.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm actually, so when I walk my dog alone, I know I'm ashamed of this, but I would if I could, I would like turn the other way or something, or go into a street like, oh, I was going this way actually. I didn't I never wanted to go down the street. I wanted to go to the left,
Yeah, just way far.
which is
But you're
horrible.
not alone in this experience of A, disliking small talk, and B, like taking different streets.
All right, that's good to
There's,
know.
there's sometimes I'm in a social mood and there's sometimes I'm not in a social mood. But I find that when I know I can have good conversations, or not, I
Yeah.
shouldn't say good conversations, but deeper conversations,
Yes.
that's when I'm more like, oh, this is interesting. But, if somebody wants to ask me, oh, what did you do this weekend? Oh, how's the weather?
I
And
know,
I,
I know,
I
and I
know that's
can't.
the entry point. So there's also like this juxtaposition, right? Like I
Yeah,
know that's how most people operate. I have to play the game a little bit, be open to some chit chat first before we can go deeper.
yeah,
But
sure. And the Dutch will want to talk about the weather first.
typically,
Yeah,
that's what I've found. Yes.
yeah, it is a cultural thing. You talk about the weather for a long time because we have so much weather. So it's
And
always
it's
something
different
to,
every day.
yeah, yeah. So
For
you can,
those not here, I can confirm
it's every day. Yeah, yeah. We have a lot of weather. And so we have a lot to talk about, and it's a cultural thing. It's an icebreaker, and then
Yeah,
and then but also another thing is that with some people, when don't talk about politics.
sure.
That's the other thing. And sometimes you don't know. You're like, can I talk about these things? So, what happened to me, I'll tell you a little thing that happened to me was this week. Oh, yeah, it was
Hmm.
really weird, really, really weird. But it has something to do with worldviews and worlds and sort of me being sort of, feeling awkward around chit
Hmm.
chat and just kind of social stuff. Anyway, is that I got a phone call. I didn't know the number. I picked it up because it was a mobile number, and it's like,
Hmm.
oh, someone's calling me on purpose. And so, and so I picked up, and it was a friend of mine, but he used to be a friend of mine. He used to be my best friend
Hmm.
from when I was like 9 years old until I was about 25, I want to say.
Okay.
And then he disappeared.
Oh.
He disappeared. He got, sorry, this sounds silly, but he got his girlfriend pregnant.
Hmm.
That I
Hmm.
know. I remember that, and that's the last time I saw him.
Life circumstances.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was also the drummer in a band,
Oh.
and he also took the drum kit. And because we were rehearsing, and we went to the rehearsal room, and the drum kit was gone, and there was a note, and he said, "Don't contact me. I don't want to talk to you. And he just left. Anyway,
He
here,
also didn't like small talk, apparently. I like.
no, because he was the guy. No, because I remember talking for hours with him and listening to this
Sure.
complicated music, and we were talking,
Yeah.
which annoyed everyone around us. I remember talking with him in this cafe, and people around us became really annoyed by the way we were talking about the universe and the kind of and this endlessness of space and stuff like that. And we're like, we were, yeah, I don't know, we were like 17, 18 or something, total
Yeah.
BS, obviously, but still, I really related to that. And
Mm.
anyway, all of a sudden he's like, can you come and visit me because I have stuff to sort of kind of talk to you about because I left. And they're like, what? Anyway, but but one part of me was like, oh yeah, right. We could talk like all day and all night about stuff.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
and then I can't talk to my neighbor, because there is, so yeah, because of the, yeah, I don't know, you connect to people, right, in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think that has something to do with because you see the world very differently, and maybe, to Victor's point, you live in a different world.
Hmm.
And I really do feel that sometimes. Like we don't live in the same world, and it we could kind of connect, but it takes a lot of effort. And
Hmm.
with some people, it's really easy. Sometimes,
Yeah.
usually, it's with sense of humor. Also, for me, is when I can laugh with someone, or it's really easy to connect, and you can talk on a similar level. And sometimes it's really hard. You go like, oh yeah, ooh yeah, the mayor did something. I do not good. I don't know that right now.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
the tree across the street is like really something, right? Yeah. I can't do that. See, there you go. So I know what a
Thankfully, the conversation with Victor was not that, the opposite
no.
of that. The
It was
opposite of that, like instantly was flowing. Interesting.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So am I the only socially awkward person?
Certainly no. I join you in this group. Yes.
All right. Good to know. All right. I can sense that you feel that we talked enough.
Yes, that sense
Yes.
is spot on.
Yes. Okay. Then see, I do. I can do that. You're like, okay. Yes. Yes. Morgan, you're like, okay, Arnie, and that was long enough. That's a really weird intro, and now we're gonna have to listen to this really intelligent person. Yes. Okay. Let's go. Listen. Enjoy the
Yes,
episode.
the conversation. Yes.
So my last name is what we call, you're from the state. We call it a compound word. So it's Udo, and Ewa, and you just put them together, Udoewa, Udoewa. When we
Udoewa.
say it, though, the O and the E become one syllable. So it's Udoewa, Udoewa. A little bit more emphasis
Oh,
on the
that's
O
very
than the E.
elegant. Udo,
Yeah,
Ooh.
Udoewa.
Udo. Okay, I'll have to practice.
Like there's a
Udo
J in
ewa.
there almost.
Udoewa.
Udoewa.
Well, the D becomes almost flicked, but you don't have to worry about that. But
We do
you can
worry
do a
about
normal,
them.
huh?
We do worry
Udo,
about these things.
Udo,
Udoewa,
Udoewa. Okay, I'll
Udoewa.
do many
It
repetitions
almost sounds
before
like
we.
almost like an oi sound when the O and the E come together. Udoewa.
Udoewa. Does it have
There
a
you
meaning?
go.
Udoewa. No,
I
Udoewa.
mean, it has a meaning, but it's like any compound word. So one of the words means like a dog, and the other one means a rich man or a king. So the way we might think of it is maybe it's the dog of a rich man, the dog of a king, something like that.
Ooh, that's an interesting story attached to that.
Yeah.
That's
Neither of my names
Awesome.
has meaning. They just.
Is it? Yes.
Well,
It's a very lucky dog, basically.
yeah, it's a very lucky dog. But I mean, all of our, like in
Yeah.
my culture, for my people group, we're the kind of people group where all names are words in our language. So you don't have to say, oh, I wonder what this means. Let me look up it's from the Latin or from the Greek. It's just words, patience or a
Yeah.
blessing or,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what is your people group?
Ibibio. We are a minority people group in Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where in
I think it's
Nigeria?
like we're southeast side of Nigeria in the Delta region. Nigeria has somewhere around 473, 475 different kind of language groups, but
Yeah.
we're not one of the major ones. But in our state, this is the complexity. In my state or province or territory in Nigeria, we are the major people group, but then nationally, we're not a major people group or language. Yeah.
Right. And what's the language?
Ibibio, same name as the
That's
people.
okay. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay. Ibibio.
That's a fun
Yeah.
word.
IBIBIO.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And was there any, because Victor, that's a name that you hear often in the United States. Was there then, what was the thought? Like, why did they choose Victor for your?
I don't know specifically why Victor versus another British English name, but I know why they chose that. So Nigeria is part of the British Commonwealth. We were a British colony. So the colonial language is English. So, people kind of grow up, unless you're in the village, but if you're in the city, you grow up learning English. So I grew up in the United States, where I am located right now. I'm in Washington, D.C., and there was a difference of opinion. There were some Nigerian immigrants who gave their children Nigerian names. And then sometimes they had difficulties. People didn't know how to pronounce it. The little kids in school would make fun of it. So my parents wanted to avoid that, and they gave us English names.
Yeah.
However, the funny thing about my English name is they happened to give me an English name that actually is a word in English, which is funny.
True.
So I ended up having that kind of style of name anyway.
Yeah. You're Victor.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I always, and that's something that I love is that my parents are like, oh no, it sounds good. She's a Morgan. Yeah, cool. There wasn't a lot.
What is Morgan? But Morgan, because I mean, my name, my first name, Arne, is Scandinavian, and it's actually it's Eagle. It's from Eagle. And Van Oosterom, so it's from Oosterom, which I don't know where that is. But anyway, I think it's somewhere. So
You're the eagle from Ostrom.
I'm eagle from some place called Ostrom, which is just totally not important, probably because I could never find it. It could also be like a river or something. So because our last names in at least the Netherlands were chosen when this is, oh my God, my history is really bad. So sorry, people, if you know more about history, I'm gonna screw this up. But when Napoleon conquered this part of the world, they wanted to register people and they needed last names. And the Dutch at that time, the people living here who weren't Dutch at the time, but still, they did not have last names. So they chose a last name, but being forced by the French. And so a lot of people just made it really simple, like Baker, for instance, right? So I'm just a baker. I'm a baker's
Yeah.
call, or
we have this in the United States as well sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of European countries would kind of do that. Or I'm the son of, right? So that's also like a Johansson, I'm the son of Johan, basically. So that's either the daughter of the son of someone. So that could help. We also have some really rude last names because they were like, just call me shit in Dutch. That there are people, but then it's called poep, which is a different word, because they were like, this is not going to be temporary anyway, because the French are not going to stay, and the stupid, all that administration nonsense. So
What
they
a
just,
bad time to be a joker.
yeah,
Wow.
there are a lot of those names too. People who just shows like, or just kind of to annoy the French, basically. Yeah, so that also happened. But so there, but it all has a story. It all has a meaning. It all has obviously history. And so all names all names are interesting, I think. There's always there's such an amazing story. I call my daughter Julia, for instance, but that's because Julius Caesar, and because like, oh yeah, wow. So there's always these beautiful connections to the past, which I think, is I know, just like language, but I think, knowing your name and where it's from, and, there's all these stories there. So I think it's beautiful.
My
Anyway.
parents asked the nurse, should she be Morgan or should she be Olivia? And the nurse said, I think she should be a Morgan.
Yeah, there
I
you
feel like
go.
that in German, doesn't that mean something like morning?
Yeah,
Okay.
it does.
Morgan,
Yeah, or
Morgan,
tomorrow in Dutch.
Morgen. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
spelled this slightly different, but yeah, that's true. Oh,
Yeah.
that explains a lot. Yeah.
My spouse is actually, I want to say her grandparents, one side came over from the Netherlands. So her last name is Vlokstra.
Ah,
She's Dutch American.
yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of escape them because
Mm.
every time I travel, especially also to the States, but also there's always people, it's always someone who goes, oh yes, I have family from the Netherlands, because they do
Hmm.
this, especially
Everywhere. Yeah.
yeah, everywhere, which is, yeah. So my apologies for that. Yeah, because there weren't always nice people. Hey, hello, come on,
That's true. That's true.
yeah,
That's true.
let's not talk about that part of history, because it's not all positive. You know that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah, you have
Hmm.
people with your family from Nigeria.
Hmm.
You know that.
Hmm.
But it's anyway, okay. We might actually get to that as well. But my question is, how did you end up in the US? I'm pretty sure it's not by the Dutch slave trade.
No,
Probably not.
You said you were born in
no,
DC, though. You said you were born in DC,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
no, 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 no. I live in DC.
Oh, you live in DC. You weren't born in
I
DC.
No, I was born in the United States, but not in DC. I
Okay.
grew up in a place called Houston, Texas. And yeah, my parents came over for university, for studies.
Hmm.
And their intention was to just study, receive a degree, and then go back. But I think the conditions back home weren't so great, so they decided to stay a little bit longer, and then decided to stay longer, and then stayed longer, and they just ended up staying this whole time. So we grew up here. We have communities,
Mhm.
of Nigerian Americans and Nigerian immigrants, etc. But yeah, we grew up here. But me, my brother, and my sister were all dual citizens, because
Hmm.
we get citizenship even if a Nigerian person has a child outside the country, you can still get citizenship, which helps when I'm traveling in West Africa. I don't have to worry about
Yeah.
visas.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
true. And so you were mostly raised in Texas then?
Yes, I have
Okay.
lived in different places around the world, but as a child, yes, in
Okay.
Texas.
Okay. So you grew up in Arda. Have you been to Texas?
No, but I always wanted to go to Houston. Yeah, just because of the
It's
name.
unreal. It's really
Yeah.
like you can go to the States and then you can go to Texas, and it's almost like two different things.
Yeah, no, I've been close to it, but no, I haven't. No, so yeah, unfortunately, it's such a big country. I mean, so many places to go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
the hard thing. When people come, you really only get a taste unless you're going to travel around, because life is so different from place to place to place. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
that's true.
you grew up in Houston. You said you have two siblings?
I have two siblings, still have two
Okay.
siblings. They're
Okay.
still there in Houston
Okay.
with my parents. Yeah.
Aw,
Yeah. But
okay. Okay. In
I'm in
DC.
DC.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And what was that like? Because I don't know, was the concept of being a third culture kid something that was ever, it's kind of a phrase that we're hearing more often, and it's kind of this
What's
idea
a
that
third culture kid?
Yeah, a third culture kid is that your parents are from one culture,
Yeah.
but you're raised in another culture. So your parents are Nigerian, you're born and raised in the States.
It's
So
two
you kind of
cultures,
have to straddle the two.
which
So,
is the,
you know, his neighborhood or his classmates might be American, his parents are Nigerian, and he has to find his place
but that's two
in the middle.
cultures.
So that's the third culture
Oh, the third
Third
is the
is
blend of the
that he has
two
to
culture.
find. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, wow. That's a new word for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, are
yeah,
you
yeah.
aware? Were you aware? Is that
Well,
something you were aware of?
Oh, the term, yes, yeah.
No, no,
I know the
but you're
term.
in it. That you're like, no, no. I
Yeah,
mean, like that is something you're living.
yeah, for sure. And
Yeah,
it's funny too, because I ended up marrying a third culture kid. She grew up in the Philippines. Her parents were there. They're
but that makes you
developing.
into a fourth culture, then, right? That's another culture you added to the blend.
Oh, in
So
my current family.
you have a Filipino, yeah. So you're like in,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's even
But
more.
growing up, yeah, for sure. We have all kinds of things. I mean, we had Filipino aspects, Dutch, American, Nigerian aspects in our wedding ceremony for sure. We had all of that there. But yeah, I love this that we when I so I've lived in different places, and when I remember being in South Africa, right? South Africa has like a minority white population. There's a kind of a Dutch and a British white populations, the Afrikaans and the British. And
mhm.
then you have all these different African people groups, and there's Indian, and there's a colored, it's kind of a mix, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember when I was there, people, and this happens in the US, they would ask me, where are you from? So then I tell them, Nigeria, and these are white people, and the white people would say, oh, no, 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 I mean, where are you from? And I said, "Oh, okay, I know what you want. I'm from the United States." Okay, okay. Well, when a black South African would ask me, "Where are you from?" and then I say, "Oh, I'm from the United States." No, 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 no. I mean, where are you from? I was like, "Oh, okay, I know what you mean, Nigeria." And it's so funny because for us, my people group, right, where you are from is not where you're born. It's not even
Mm.
where you live. It's where your people are from. But then there's a lot of people, especially I had this in the US, but I had this again, like I said in South Africa with white South Africans. It's no, it's where you grew up, it's where it's the accent, it's your citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. So we have these nonprofit charity groups, I guess is what you would call it, of people in the United States who are from my state or territory or province in Nigeria.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And we have different local chapters, and we have a national convention, and we have all kinds of activities. We raise money to send back home to do good projects. We have cultural activities and dance and food and all kinds of things. We have contests, etc. And then we have another one that are from it's a nonprofit or a charity organization in the United States of people who are from we would call them it's like a collection of villages. I don't even know. The closest thing in the United States we have is like a county. But
Mhm.
from my same county, we have our organization. We have local chapters. We have a national convention. We have fundraise. We have beauty pageant. All these kinds of things. And I remember one year, my brother, because of this thing where some people are calling you one thing and some people are calling you another thing, they made a shirt, my brother and his age group of Nigerian Americans. And the shirt was black. It had white letters and it said Nigerian. And then it had a period. And then right below it, it said American. And then it had a period. And I love that because I was
Mm.
like, yeah, I'm both.
Yeah.
Why, or let me define who I am, or let me allow me to say where I'm from, etc. But I don't have to choose, and there's mixtures and parts of it that are in me. But you definitely felt it growing up as a black person or being considered black, because we didn't have that in Nigeria, in the United States, because there was definitely a difference, a cultural difference between African Americans, what we call African Americans, and
Mhm.
me as a Nigerian American, knowing my language, knowing my culture, my clothing, my food, etc., and not knowing
Ah,
sometimes some of
right,
the things that African Americans knew,
right.
etc. It was just different.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I mean, because you, yeah, because basically your people, you know, you come from a people from a group, and that's clear that you know where you're from. Yeah. So it's for me, so it's such a kind of difficult to imagine that really, like if you are treated different, but at the same, I think here in the Netherlands, I mean, there's just, and Morgan, you will know that there's a sort of I'm making it's like I'm quoting, but it's like we have a problem with Moroccan youth, right? But it's really interesting, and there is a problem and but the problem is really complex because we call them Moroccan. The fact that we call them Moroccan, because often they're like third generation. They're Dutch.
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
Moroccan. If they go to Morocco, they're tourists. So they don't they're not seen as Moroccan in Morocco, but here we call them that, and they look slightly different, not even that much different, but they are North American, North African people. You can tell, sure, but the point is that so we can see a slight difference there, and we call them you're Moroccan, and so they don't feel at home here because we separate them. We say you're clearly different because that's always how we call them. We give them the name. It's in the language. But when they go sort of what's supposed to be their home, because they're third generation, went there. Maybe they have some great grandparents there, maybe, and they are tourists there, so they are kind of lost, and so they get into trouble because they have no identity, and they feel that they're like, they're not really valued as citizens, et cetera, et cetera. So that is such a difficult problem to solve. But I mean, it's probably not the same, but that's sort of the closest that I can get to it's sort of a African American kind of experience where you go like, yeah, but this is my home. This is
Hmm.
where, I am from here, but then so that, but then at the same time, yes, in your past, maybe somewhere you were maybe from Nigeria, maybe from Ghana, maybe from another place, but that's also not your place. So it's such a complicated, and I listened to a talk, and I just before we press record, I said I really want to talk about this sort of way of being, or the ontological anthropology, basically, that you mentioned. You talked about that in another podcast, which I thought was really interesting, and somehow I connected it to this because the way I understood it was that we all live in a different world, in different reality, but
Mhm.
we live in a different reality, and somehow if you don't if that, because that is both a problem and a solution if you're aware of that, because you're like, oh, you're the way you see I can't see the world the way you see the world. So we talk about empathy a lot in design and in innovation, and I always say, that I think it's impossible, because how can because empathy meaning I can walk a mile in your shoes. I can, so as a designer, I should have empathy, build empathy. By doing so, I start understanding you. I see the world through your eyes. And I remember we were working with refugees from Syria a few years ago. And I know it was one of those moments I realized I cannot ever, you know, really, really have built real empathy in that sense, really understanding, feeling what people felt when they had to flee on a boat with their kids, and travel through the hostile territory, and landing here, and then still being kind of pushed away. So so this idea of I can't, which to me was such a solution as a designer and as someone who's working in innovation, saying, actually, I can't. So I need to include you in what I do, because I can't see the world. You have to be part of what I do. You have to be part of the way I create things or design things. I want to hear, I need to listen to you continuously, because if I start thinking, yes, I know what you feel, so now I can go away and design. So sorry, it's a long story
A bit.
from where did we start racism
But and I think
to
but then maybe to bridge that, right? Like
that
you
was a bridge. I meant it as a
I'm
bridge.
yes, I'm helping you here, Anna. So
Now you should have helped me like 5 minutes ago when it was. Did you hear me struggle? Come on.
to bridge that, growing up in Texas do you identify as a Nigerian American or Nigerian period American period? American period?
Texan.
I identify as all three.
All three.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So
yeah.
Texas, American, Nigerian, child of academic parents. How did you then find yourself, yeah, in a field of design, which is not as of course, we can apply a lot of academic lenses to it, but it doesn't have as long of a history in terms of design does, but looking at design from a professional, you don't grow up hearing of, oh yeah, I want to be a designer. But was that reality for you growing up? Like, did you know that you wanted to be a designer and help bring other people into the equation?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I don't even like the term designer. I am like it's in my title in my current job today. I have the word
Mhm.
design in my title, but I really shy away from the word. I don't like to use it. I think there's a lot of hubris, or
Mm.
there's kind of a false hierarchy, I think, with this term designer. No, I didn't think about design. Well, I let me say this. Design is a huge, huge, huge term. It's a huge umbrella for many,
Yeah.
many, many different things. So I grew up thinking about becoming an engineer.
Mm.
And in my mind, an engineer designs, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't have called the engineer a designer. And I was not thinking at all about any type of design that incorporates human factors or desirability or anything like that. This is more of design from a technical feasibility perspective or even
Mhm.
economic viability. But
Mhm.
so design was in my mind, but as something that is done by, say, an engineer, et cetera, et cetera. But I had very creative parents, and I don't, it's funny, I would not have thought of them as designers as a child, but I mean, they're designers. I mean, there's whole worlds of, I mean, we might call them black material geographies in ways that people have used the creation and shaping and shifting of materials as a way of not just being, but a way often of resisting and kind of working
Mm.
against particular powers or hierarchies, et cetera. But my mother, for instance, is wonderful, even outside of like kitchen, like culinary creations, is just a wonderful like maker of clothes. And I could say something as a child like, "Oh, I really wish I had pants like MC Hammer." At one point when I was a child in high school, MC Hammer was this famous US American hip hop rapper, and he wore these pants that some people call parachute pants, but they're just very almost like balloons around each leg, just
Yeah.
big, billowy, light cloth, etc. And she's like, okay. And then she made me a bunch, and I'd wear them to school, and I feel really cool. And but
Oh,
she was like that. She was a whiz at at making clothes, and she could she could definitely take a pattern designed by someone else and create it, but she could also create her own. And so my father is a visual artist. Now everything I'm telling you, this was not how they made money. And I think
Mhm.
in a different world, if they were able to, maybe they could have gone into those spaces. But these were things that I noticed, skills that I didn't realize that they had until, they helped me with it, or, I needed to do something for an assignment and my father sat down and helped me draw something. They had really amazing skills that I wish they could have stayed with longer or developed more.
right.
Yeah.
But because
Okay.
what did they study when they
My
came to the
father
US?
studied accounting because
Mhm.
the mental model is it's very difficult to find a Nigerian of his generation who would go to Europe or North America to
Hmm.
study theater or, or history or English or something like that. Everything
Yeah.
is pretty practical,
Sure.
accounting, law, engineering, medicine, etc. So he came to do accounting. He thought that was the best way to make money. My mother, I believe, did nursing, and she was working in the medical field, and then it switched to education at one point. So yeah, but they had
Yeah.
these amazing design skills that I still see to today.
I
Oh,
think
that's very cool.
it's still difficult. I mean, if I look at the design community, for instance, not there are not a lot of black people,
No.
right? So the creative world in general, I think, but specifically also the design world. No, I was talking to a lady the other day, and basically I'm gonna be coaching her. And so she's a black lady from the US, and she was actually, which was funny because she wanted me to coach her because I'm a white dude, and she wanted to have also, because she said, I'm going to end up in this world of white male leaders, so I want to understand how they think. So that's why I thought it would be good to be coached by you. I thought, oh,
Didn't know this was
never.
a selling point, but
No.
interesting turn of events.
That's a first. It's like, oh wow, really? That's a thing. I had to tell her, like, there are American corporate white dudes, and then there are Dutch white dudes, which are not. I mean, I don't always understand them either. So I mean, okay, but we can go and kind of look at that and see what happens. But no, but I mean, but I this is not the first time I've heard of that. But the fact that she was so aware of the fact that she's a creative, she wants to be design leader, but she knows that when she kind of becomes sort of a leader, she's going to have to kind of live in this white and usually male dominant world. And it's such, and I know there's a group in the US that is trying to kind of get more Black designers to or at least choose choose that path, know that it's there, it's possible, but it's still really, I don't, so actually, to be quite honest, and maybe I am a bit naive about these things, to be honest, because I'm white and I don't have to worry about these things. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I do question myself every now and then. Like, why is that? Why don't I understand
Hmm.
that that is happening in the world of design, the service design world? I know maybe two Black people, maybe, right? And in the design thinking world, maybe a little bit more, but because a lot of that is in the US, but here in Europe, seriously, we can have conferences with like a few hundred people, maybe two Black people,
And I
maybe.
think
It happened, by the way, and that's
Yeah.
so weird. You go like,
Yeah.
huh, how must that feel that you're like the only Black person in the room full of
Hmm.
designers when we are the creative? We talk about diversity all the time.
Hmm.
That's our thing. That's our whole thing, right? And then you're like,
Hmm.
and you go to a design conference, you're like, well, what about
Hmm.
diversity again? Tell me. So, so anyway, can you
I
solve
think
this for us? Any solution?
Uh, yeah, I'll solve it. Just let's hear from Morgan first, and then I'll have an answer
Yeah,
for you.
yeah, okay. Please, thank you. Yes, Morgan.
Well, I mean, I have nothing of val. I mean,
You
no,
have
that's not
nothing
true.
of value to share. I have
I
nothing of value.
certainly cannot solve this problem. I don't think I'm curious to see what Victor has to say about this. But I was going to say, I didn't even know you could be a designer
I
until,
thought you were going to say, I didn't even know you could be a Black designer.
oh no.
I
When I
didn't even know
realized
that.
designers are real
Yes,
people, then I was
they
my
are.
my eyes were open to all kinds of
They
possibilities.
are. They are
Hmm.
real people,
Designers are real people.
which is the
But
problem,
because I
probably.
also went down the engineering route at first. My dad's an engineer, and it's about solving problems. My
Hmm.
family's very creative. And so I was kind of, kept being drawn in this direction, but I was like, engineering doesn't feel quite right for me. And I remember I was talking to another kid at university one day. He goes, yeah, no, but my dad's a designer. And like I knew there were graphic designers, but that's all yeah, okay, that wasn't my thing. But then when he started telling me, I was like, oh my God, you can spend your life creating things as not an
Hmm.
engineer. And that for me was just like this light bulb moment, like, oh hey, like I can spend my life doing this.
Hmm.
Um, so then, but having so I think and when you had mentioned the woman that you're coaching, Arna, before you mentioned, that just to see things that are possible, right? So getting things in your viewfinder that are, oh hey, I could do that too. And I think that's what connects so much with creative
Yeah.
leadership, right? People are out there doing
Yeah.
new cool things. Like, oh, if they're doing that, maybe I could do something similar.
Well, that's what her goal is, to kind of sort of show and be that example for kids.
Hmm.
Like, oh,
Mhm.
that's actually, which is part of what we talk about leadership, is sort of like showing that yes,
Hmm.
you can be a designer, you can be a
Hmm.
creative, yes, you can. And it's very confrontational, to be honest, that you like, how is that possible? And then obviously, so it's also being a woman, no, right?
Mhm.
So which is so kind of like, so it wasn't just that, dealing with men as well, white
Yeah.
corporate leaders.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, it's interesting. Not just because you talked about your parents being creatives, but having to choose sort of a more, I don't know, a more practical kind of path to make a living, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, they were lucky. My father was a customs officer in Nigeria. at that time, actually still today, the US and many other countries do this as well, but the US limits the number of people that can come in from from different countries, certain
Hmm.
countries. So you have to enter the lottery. It's a lottery system, and if you win, then you get to be one of the few that comes over. We even have a lottery system just for a visitor visa. Forget about trying to become a permanent resident and staying for a long time, or
Yeah.
or a student visa in their case originally. But even for a visitor visa, you have to do a lottery. So because of his connections, he was able to use it to get in. But a lot of people, if you don't have the money, if you don't have connections, you're not going to be one of the people that gets to come in unless you just happen to win the lottery. So it even, sometimes it pulls a particular level of society with particular means that can come over. And so
Right.
it's not really pulling a diverse spectrum
Mm.
of society from these various countries.
Mm.
But, your question about the design thing, I mean, I could talk specifically about design, but I feel like if I talk specifically about design, I'm going to hide or obfuscate the actual problem.
Yeah.
This
Mm.
issue of a lack of representation is not specific to design, at least not in the
Mm.
United States.
Mm.
We have
No.
it across all aspects of
No,
society,
no, totally. Yeah,
from
for sure. Yeah.
leadership, business, higher education. You can go on and on and on. And I think this just has to do with, our historical past, with the systematic destruction of Black families. There was a time, I haven't looked recently, but, there were more Black men 18 to 24 who were in jail than in universities. The shift from slavery to then Jim and Jane Crow, then to mass incarceration. And so the system is very good at self-preserving and
Hmm.
shape shifting while still maintaining the same purpose.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
there's a lot of us that do this, the type of work that we do
Yeah.
anyway. I have to often go above the service level. You can think of, you know, visual design, industrial design of objects, interaction design of experiences, service design, but you can also go to some people say systemic
Systemic,
design.
yeah, systemic
Mhm.
design. Hmm.
So I work on a lot of like systems approach, systems practice. I like to say I try not to use the design term anyway, but part of that is this understanding of, if you look at all the various worlds, if you really understand that we're in a world of many worlds, right? This kind
Hmm.
of pluralistic multiverse that we call the pluriverse, then you realize, oh, it's actually really, it's impossible to separate the definition of a concept and the context of a concept, right? I got this
Mm.
from
Mm.
Sean Wilson. He has this beautiful book called Research is Ceremony. He said that if I give you the definition of a concept, you lose the context. But if I give you the context, you lose the universal definition. So I've learned that, oh,
Hmm.
actually the Western understanding, the academic understanding of what design is really narrow. It's much, much, much bigger than that. And there are lots of people who do design. Even in
Yeah.
fact, I listening to something you were talking about, Arna, you were talking about some of the problems and problem solving. When you look at design, at least as I'm learning to understand it in the pluriverse, there's a lot of design that has nothing to do with solving problems or issues or
Hmm.
challenges, right? There's design for self-expression, for beauty, for creation, for wayfinding, for cultural preservation, for survival, for
Mm.
legacy leaving, for moral education, and I can go on and on and on.
Hmm.
Things can be designed just because of a goal or a hope or ambition or a future unrelated to any kind of problem. So it's just much
Mm.
bigger, and trying to understand all these various worlds that we inhabit is really, really important to bring
Mm.
to bear. And so when you do that, you realize, oh wow, everybody designs, right? Not everyone has the title.
Totally.
So if I say that I'm a bricklayer or a shoemaker, one of the things I'm saying is that there are people who are not shoemakers. And that's
Hmm.
why I call myself a shoemaker. So
Mm.
sometimes when I say design, sometimes I worry about saying design because there are some negative aspects of design, or at least Western design. But then sometimes I worry about saying it because there are people that design in all kinds of spaces. It's the same thing with
Yeah.
creativity, as opposed to it being something that some people have and some people don't have, or a type of job. I always think of creativity as something you can apply to anything, any kind of
Yeah.
job, any role, function, etc. So
Yeah.
I worry about creating a distinction. But anyway, I've
No.
I've been falling in love with relearning and unlearning, but relearning all the different ways that people around me, like my parents, etc., have been and were designers without me ever really kind of realizing it.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. There's a really interesting video I posted some time ago, and it's a video that because because it's exactly what I've always been saying. So if you just look around where you are right now, where are you? What do you see? What are you wearing? Everything. Now take away everything that has been designed, if you will. And where are you now? It's like you're like in a forest or in the desert, or you're in nature somehow, but everything somehow is everything man-made is designed somehow. And there's this video that kind of, it is actually about engineering, but I was like, no, it's about design anyway. But the film, because it's for a school, I think, to kind of say, everything's engineering, and then everything disappears, buildings disappear, cars disappear, clothes disappear, because everything's kind of created somehow, and so by people that something. And I've always been, and in your on your LinkedIn, you call yourself a service design lead. And I've always been finding this word service designer, for instance, because I will say everyone's a service designer in an organization, or no one is, because we all do that. We all,
Oh yeah.
it's a systemic idea,
Yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
there's not one person. It's actually the whole system of people, this whole community of people that is creating that value together with the people that you design for, and et cetera, et cetera. So but the problem with language is that, and also specifically the problem of professional language, is that we need to use words that then people say, I want that. Oh,
Mm.
I like, oh, I want what you can do, your skills, or your vision, or
Yeah.
so, oh, now we're looking for service designers. Oh, now we're looking for design thinkers. So now and I used to have a company called Design Thinkers, but we were selling service design. And then, because in the early days in Europe, service design was a big thing. It was a big community of people. And then, because of IDEO and Tim Brown, he wrote this book about design
Mhm.
thinking. And then all companies went like, oh, that is awesome. We want design thinking. And I literally just did a search and replace on all our documents, replacing service design with design thinking, because that's the language they spoke. And it's the same thing. Right. It is actually, it's all the same. It's the same toolkit. It's the same way of because to me, it was a way of thinking. It wasn't this, it was actually a way of thinking, saying, hey, I first want to understand what the problem is. And then I will look for tools that we can use to solve it. And because I actually think it is all problem solving, but I think it's not so much that here's a big problem, let's solve it. But even wayfinding, there will be problems you need to solve in collaboration, in resources, in all kinds of things to make it work. All day long, we are dealing with little issues, and we have to. I think we are, as humans, we are problem solvers. I think that actually everything is a way of survival, and trying to kind of go through life and find sort of meaning and happiness, and fixing, making a living, and making sure your kids can go to school. And we're problem solving all the time, surviving in this corporate environment with all these white dudes, trying to whatever. I think that's sort of what we are really good at. And I think problem solving is actually something we don't teach our kids enough, because I think we teach them that you go from A to B in a straight line. In general, we say, what do you want to be? I want to be that. Okay, this is what you need to learn. So this is your skill. But the world is changing so rapidly. Once they graduated, the world is different. What I do now, what you're doing, when you started school, didn't exist. Right? When I'm doing the podcast, weren't there. I'm pretty sure
Mhm.
when I was a kid,
Mm.
I had no, when someone would have told me, what you're going to do later? You're
You're
going to
going to
talk into a
spend your time
microphone
on a
with people on the
podcast.
screen. Like that's Star Trek. That's like, wow. Right.
Mm.
So we figure it out, COVID happens, and we're figuring it out. Things change, we're always that. So I think the nature of us, and I think something that we forget about, sort of the basics, the kind of the roots of where we come from, is problem solvers. So there,
Yeah, I mean,
not a
I
question, but
I would even say, sometimes it's not even about going from A to B. It's like going from A and then you're not even at B because everything changes, and so you're now
exactly.
going to a new
Yes.
direction.
Yeah.
Or even that diagram they have with bunch of squiggle lines, and then it finally comes out into a straight line as the
Yeah.
design
Yeah.
process. I'm
Yes.
like, oh
Mhm.
Yeah.
no, My experience is we go from squiggle to squiggle.
Yeah,
It's just
exactly.
chaos to
Mine
chaos.
too. No, this is
It
such
never
a good
becomes
point.
unambiguous.
It's such a good point. The point is that that squiggle is created to sell, the fuzzy front end of design thinking or innovation, and to say to your clients, it will be fine.
Mhm.
All these frameworks, all these images that are created by salespeople, and I'm part of those because I created some of those. And I said, look, we're okay. See, I have these lines and these words on a PowerPoint, and this is what's going to happen, because otherwise people get nervous, because there is no straight line and there is no A to B. There's chaos and order, right? So that's what's going to happen. And from order you go back to chaos, because that's nature, that's evolution, that's how things work. But we want things to be in control because we haven't learned that chaos is okay, because you need it to come up with new solutions and stuff. We've learned that we need control and order, and we need to be experts, and we need to know what's going on. And I think that is probably the biggest problem that we have as people when we are facing with big existential crises, because we're like, oh, we know this chaos, we can't deal with it. But actually it is chaos that leads to new innovations and solutions. And so being comfortable with that, being in the squiggle line, is what we should teach people.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
I don't,
uncertainty tolerance. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I don't even know. I mean, I think it's fine to say that chaos to order, chaos order. There are, I mean, for some of us, we don't get to order at all, especially with systems
Yeah.
type of work. It's just
Mhm.
maybe there, it depends on what you mean by order. Maybe there's order in like maybe what we will do,
Yeah.
but I don't know if we ever get, sometimes we have systems that we don't ever get to any type of homeostasis.
Yeah.
It's just continual, we're learning, we're adapting, and we're trying, and we're learning, adapting, experimenting, and we just experiment our way to the future. I think the beautiful video you talked about of like, imagine a person sitting where they're sitting with whatever clothes and all the devices, and then you just take everything away that's designed. You could go further. You could say, well, eventually you remove the person, right?
Yes.
That, from this idea of ontological design, right? The first principle is, we design the world and then the world designs us back, right? We
Mm.
design these apps and these apps then design us. They change our ways of being and moving and living throughout the world. And so, in some sense, we are, I don't know, cyborgs. There's a beautiful new book, by the way, from MIT Press called Cyborg. You should check it out. It talks about critical cyborg theory. But, we're these people with appendages and
Mm.
extensions that into our machines and things. And so we've ultimately kind of design things that have designed us, and so in some sense we are designed as well. But then even design goes out into the natural world, right? I hate to
Mhm.
say separate ourselves from nature, because I think of us as natural, and then in some sense if we are natural, then whatever we create is natural, even though we create harmful things that harm other parts of the nature. But there are
Mm.
all kinds of animals and things that create harmful things or create good things, and there's this beautiful mix and symbiosis or
Mhm.
tribiosis, et cetera, that of different groups interacting with each other in this huge ecological system. But we just happen to be the most, I think, harmful species
Yes.
on this planet in ways that we've become conscious of, but still don't have the collective will to change. So anyway, I was just
And
thinking about that kind of, go ahead.
well, I was going to say one of the classes that I teach is called Design with Nature. And
Yeah,
we look at biomimicry and how nature
yeah,
solves problems.
yeah,
And there's poisonous frogs, there's poisonous
yeah,
bugs. Poison could
yeah.
be seen as a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you also look at the design principles that nature uses,
Mm-hmm.
it's done so efficiently. It's done so,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we could, so I like how you're also kind of reframing like, okay, well, humans, we're natural, so it's also natural for our brains to move in one way. But then
Yeah.
also thinking, are we using the same principles, or are we letting nature inspire us? If we want to solve a problem, I don't know, say something tech related, might not seem natural, but there's a lot of inspiration and a wealth of knowledge out there if people are willing to just realize that, we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, lots of animals build and design and create things from homes and nests and fortresses and barriers. And I mean, you even have trees, right, that do this beautiful thing. I don't know if you ever read The Wonderful Life of Trees, but,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I did.
use the
Yeah.
mycelium
Yeah, it's
to send
amazing.
signals to each other, to warn of impending danger. Oak trees will grab roots together and hold to create greater
Yeah.
resilience from tornadoes and hurricanes. And birch and mangrove and ash trees all rise up from one single root. And I mean, it's just kind of phenomenal of the design that even exists
And
in
even trees
in
even migrate,
yeah,
which
Yeah.
yeah,
to me that book was like I actually made me sort of it made me sort of worry a lot about, oh, we know nothing about kind of these things. So
Yeah.
we, if trees, I mean, because they move at a different pace and think that, but how things, when things change really, slowly, we don't see it.
Hmm.
We don't see a plant grow. You don't see your kids grow. You don't see those changes, but they're still there. It is changing. So we have these blind, it's change blindness. And change blindness is such an interesting thing. And I did this whole thing about change blindness and all these, but it's so confrontational that we are so blind to so many things that are changing around us, but we don't see it because our brain doesn't see it as important, or it just takes such a different pace, and we just don't, we don't register it.
I
And
wonder if it's like necessary for our survival or our human understanding, right? Because like
well, you sure,
if
of
I met you
course.
tomorrow and you were a completely different person, I'd be like, Arna, is everything okay? What
Or if you
happened?
actually see your kids grow, and like you actually are aware of how they kind of grow, you're
Like
like,
on their
that's.
birthday, every like the night of their birthday, they just turn into like the stereotypical
Yeah, but haven't you done this, that you went to, or that you were, I mean, I used to kind of look at this clock, for instance, time is passing, but you just
Mhm.
don't see it move. You don't see you don't
Yeah.
see, or just, this sounds really silly, but if you look at a plant, and you go like, it's growing. I know it's growing. I mean, now it's spring, and so we planted all these seeds and these flowers and what have you. And there's a huge difference between 2 weeks ago and now.
Hmm.
Huge difference. It's
Yeah.
green, there's flowers. I didn't see it happen, right? But I looked away for a day or so, and there's like, oh, something changed. But
Yeah.
so I look at it and go like, it's changing now, and I can't see it. I cannot see it happening. And
Yeah.
it might sound silly, but I think it's really profound. It's really, really important. Like those trees migrating, they are migrating because of the climate. You're right.
yeah,
It's amazing, but we're so busy, making, images in Midjourney, and that we, you know, or
yeah.
looking at using Google Earth to look at our own home, that we
Hmm.
just don't see that there's this whole planet that is moving and growing and living and changing and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know what to do with that. It's not like I don't have any advice for that, or ideas about this, but it's, I think you said, I don't want to say that we're different from nature, but because we are not different from nature, because how could we possibly be different from nature? And I am always really irritated by this idea that we are also the end of evolution. We're like the crowning, this
Hmm.
is the
The
this
crowning
is it,
achievement.
right? And even I can remember, like, when I was a kid, things looked different, but I mean,
Hmm.
we are not the crowning achievement. This is not the end of things, but we
No, I
kind of
hope not.
we act like that.
Yeah.
We're like, this is it. And this, yeah, exactly. I hope not. It's like, this is
This is
it.
as good as
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
gets.
This is the
yeah.
best, that you cannot get any better than this. Right.
No,
So,
it's super helpful for us in social change work because I have this all the time, whether it's at the organizational level or more with some of the systems that you deal with, Morgan, like the
Mhm.
system transitions, people get really, really discouraged. And you have to
Yeah.
remind them that, oh, deep change occurs over deep time.
Mm.
Even things like, how we talk about the extractive industries and fossil fuels,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're actually like, if you really think about it in geological timescales, fossil fuels are actually a renewable resource. It's just that we use it at a rate
exactly.
faster than it renews. Anyway, it is helpful sometimes with social change work.
Yeah, no, no,
And
it is,
and
but
so then I was going to say when you and because then when you look at people who are approaching these social systems or systemic work and they're seeing that there's a need to overhaul and to change things, right? but you can't just be like, oh yeah, the system's going to overhaul itself at 4 p.m. on Thursday. It doesn't flip over like that. What do you like, what encouragement, or what do you ever find yourself getting discouraged with when you, I think you called it system practice?
Yeah, with
Is that
systems
the phrase?
practice, or you could say systemic design, it's fine. Well, I mean, I hate to go into long talks, but let me say briefly that yes, I have a lot of friends who have experienced burnout, I think is the proper term,
Mm-hmm.
because they are doing the work, whether it's child welfare or maternal health or food apartheid or climate change, etc., because they are motivated by the outcome they want to see. So if they don't see the outcome, or they don't even see us moving towards the outcome, they become discouraged and they lose motivation, because that's what motivates them, the outcome.
Sure, the outcome, yeah.
Right. But there's a different type of way of being. And we can go back, Arna, to some of the stuff you were asking about with these different worlds or realities, existences, where I call this an ethics of hopelessness, right? Because I think a lot of times, especially in the design world, but I see this in other spaces that I'm in, is that we speak and we talk and we teach with an ethic of hope, or an
Mm.
ethics of hope, so that you are really, really able to encourage and gather up and combine people together who have hope. But the problem is that those types of messages or lectures or courses or workshops or talks don't speak to people who are hope indifferent or hope unsure or hopeless. And if I truly want a broad coalition of people who are going to move together, regardless of whether they believe this will happen or not, I need a different type of pedagogy, a different type of ethics, right? So I tend to talk about an ethics of hopelessness, which is where the reason we do what we do is not because we believe we will see the outcome. Because if it is, then people who don't believe they will see the outcome don't participate,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we do what we do not because we believe we'll see the outcome. We do what we do with an ethic of hopelessness because we believe that's what integrity does. We do what we do not because we'll see the outcome, or we believe we'll see the outcome. With an ethics of hopelessness, we do what we do because that's what dignity does. We don't do what we do because we think we'll see the outcome. With an ethics of hopelessness, we do what we do because we want our children to say we did the right thing, our future generations say that we did the right thing. We do what we do not because we believe we'll see the outcome. With an ethics of hopelessness, we do what we do because that's what love does. That's the right thing to do. So it's almost a way of being apart from the outcome, that if I want this world to change, I need to be the change regardless of what happens out here, and just live it. It moves it not just from a strategy, and it still is a strategy, but it's also just a daily practice. You know
Mm.
what I mean? So that has been super helpful for me, where I still do strategic work and I still think about outcomes. But even if you told me, Victor, today I can look into the future and this thing that you're working on will never happen, I will still keep doing the work, because for me, it's a way of being. And this is what I mean
Mm.
by an ethics of hopelessness.
Well, that's really
You should do
brilliant.
spoken word.
I have.
I can tell. I can tell. I'm like, yeah, whoa.
Well, you have a theater background, if I remember from listening to some of the episodes.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I did comedies. I just
Yeah,
stupid
comedy. I haven't done
jokes.
that. I've done theater.
You've done theater.
Yeah. Theater
Ah,
is super, super helpful. Yeah.
I've
It
done
was funny.
some.
You had an episode with Colin, I don't remember the last name, who does a lot of embodied practice and talks
Hmm.
about Ma, etc. Yeah.
Colin
And it
Skelton. Is
was
that how you pronounce it?
Colin
Colin Skelton?
Skelton. Yeah.
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 yeah,
Yeah.
it was super interesting to hear, because for me, I have a lot, I approach things from different realms, and this goes back to the worlds, like a world of many worlds, right?
Hmm.
So I come into a space, let's say I write an academic paper. So then they get these academic reviewers, these professors, and it's like, wait a minute, this isn't right. There's no where's the methodology? And the thing is that they're approaching it from a particular way of being and knowing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without going into, there's this tree that I often imagine. You have these roots that's our ways of being, our worlds, our existences, our realities. Then the trunk of the tree is our ways of knowing. Then out of that come our ways of doing, our methodologies, the branches. And then from the branches come the leaves, the different methods or activities are doing. So sometimes someone is evaluating what you're doing from their particular ways of being and knowing. which
Mm-hmm.
only allows certain methodologies.
Yeah.
But you're like, wait a minute, I'm not coming from that, way of being. You talked about trees migrating. You talked about earlier in this conversation about being a third culture kid and nomad. So there's actual ways of designing that come out of thinking of nomadic ways of being. There are ways of designing that come out of fugitivity. What does it mean to be a fugitive running away from the plantation or the factory or the mine, right? In a colonial world. So there are all these different things. And so I now I lost my train of thought because I got so excited. I
Just keep going.
I
It's
I just keep going. Yeah, no, I
You
don't even
wrote
know
a
what I'm saying.
paper, academics reviewed it, they were looking through a
Yeah,
lens.
yeah. They look through this particular lens, so they critique things, but it's coming from their own particular world. But there are so many ways of methodologies, let me say, of designing. This relates to Colin. This is where I was going. Colin has these embodied ways, but we have all these embodied ways that just come out of our various hyperlocal and indigenous ways of being, right? So I come from an African indigenous group, the EBVU, and we have all these different things, but there are arts-based methodologies that involve song. I'll give you an example. I was about a month ago, I was doing a workshop. I was co-facilitating a workshop with a community in North Carolina. It's a state on the East Coast of the United States. And this community it's a big city, but within a larger county that has some smaller towns. And this county was experiencing divides across race, religion, economic class, and geography, or urban, rural. And the manifestation of those divides is inequitable development in areas like education, housing, transportation, as well as inequitable representation in the county government and city government. But they've been doing these methods and trying and researching and using analytical brain power to problem solve, and they're stuck. They couldn't improve the situation, which is pretty normal with systemic problems. You could be stuck on the same thing for hundreds of years. So we were brought in, and we were going to do something using a different type of knowledge. So, there's energetic, emotional, intuitive, aesthetic, embodied, lived experiential, relational, community, spiritual. So there's so many different types of knowledges beyond mainstream institutional knowledge, the knowledge you get from a book, a college, a university, a report, a degree, etc. So we were doing a practice called social presencing theater, which again, I think is one of these things. We have this, now when I say we, I'm switching to my Western self. We have this way of inventing things that have already existed, or giving a name to things that have already existed for thousands of years. So anyway, social presencing theater is this kind of thing. It's an arts-based practice because it uses theater, but it's also an awareness-based practice because it's tapping into non-mainstream institutional knowledge, specifically embodied knowledge. And there's different methods or activities, but the main one we were working towards, and the final thing we did when we met, was this thing called 4D mapping, where you kind of map out a system. And normally with systems, systemic design, transition design, you could spend weeks, months. I've even seen some beyond a year of doing the systems research to create and build this beautiful, complex systems map. But what's amazing with some of these other practices, you can do it in an hour or two, right? You get people together who embody different parts of the system, have lived experience, et cetera, and you give people different roles. They don't have to play their own role. And then we form this sculpture where we embody the current stuck reality of the system, right? And then using embodied knowledge, doesn't have to come from lived experiential knowledge. You allow because this is unsustainable, whatever this position that everyone's in relation to each other. So you allow the body to move into a more sustainable position, a collective positioning. And then you kind of look at what happened. Where did change start first? Who moved first and what happened? And then take insights from that to make strategic decision making. And I thought it was really interesting because we did this activity. And I remember there's this one part of the city of Burlington, East Burlington, that is predominantly African American and has average lower incomes than West Burlington, which is predominantly white, and that's where this university is. And this gentleman who represented this part of the county and the city was lying on the ground. I don't know if he was first face down or face up for the first sculpture. And I thought, normally what would happen is, because people can interact as they move from sculpture on to sculpture too. So someone could come and pick him up and move him and help him and, whatever, as they get to a more sustainable thing that they can relax in. And he got up on his own. It was the first movement. It's the thing that started because you stay in this tense sculpture and then you allow change to happen wherever it happens. It could start anywhere. It started with him. He got up on his own. And then it set in motion all these other things. And I thought, how it was super insightful because we're like, we always thought we had to empower them. We didn't realize they can empower themselves with their own agency kind of. And so
Right.
it's kind of beautiful thing. So we do all these, I do practices with
Yeah.
arts,
Yeah.
with theater, with social poetry, with, with drumming, with writing, with all kinds of things as ways to figure out how do we create and move forward in different various situations. So it's really beautiful. The other thing I should say probably, which I think is really important, is that the differentiation between a world and a worldview, because for me, they are different. Like you can
Mm.
have a rich white male person,
Mm.
and I'm in the United States, with a Black immigrant Muslim transgender person, right? And they both work for social justice. They both are aware of the things that are happening. So they have a very similar worldview,
Mm.
Mm.
and they're aligned in solidarity. But there are things that happen to this Black immigrant female Muslim person that do not exist, right? Whether it's police stoppings that don't exist for this other rich white male person, or
Mhm.
being labeled as aggressive or hypersexual. There are things that exist in this person's world that do not exist in this other person's world. So
Right.
you can have same worldviews, but live in different worlds. And those worlds then affect your ways of being. How do you live in such a world? How do you navigate, et cetera, et cetera? And then you could also
Exactly.
have people who live in the same world with two different worldviews, right? So I can have two people, one person that believes that we call the person Santa Claus. Some people say Father Christmas. There's different terms. In Nigeria, we say Father Christmas. But one person believes, one adult believes Santa Claus is real. The other one believes Santa Claus is not real. But whether or not they believe Santa Claus is real or not, Santa Claus exists. I don't know, insists in their world. So, for instance, both of them pay tax money to the federal government to staff more people during December to handle the influx of extra mail from millions of children who are requesting gifts for the government, right? Both of them might help Santa Claus, whether they believe in Santa Claus or not, with children who don't have a lot. Like, it affects our ways of being, whether or not you have the same beliefs. So I always try to differentiate from beliefs, culture,
Mhm.
linguistics, worldview. The reality that exists and insists upon you can be different for different people, and it can affect, your ways of being. So out of that, you end up with all these different methodologies. So I love what Colin, has done and is doing, but I also want to recognize the various hyperlocal communities, indigenous communities have been doing all of these very different ways
Yeah.
of being and doing for thousands of years.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting though. You could maybe argue that because everyone has experienced life differently, so that except that sometimes the differences might be more subtle and not so extreme. So I can have a friend who grew up, I have actually friends who grew up in the same place as I did, in similar households, went to the same school, and still we're different.
Yeah.
Still we are different because my parents have very different parents and
Mhm.
than his parents, and et cetera, et cetera. So I just think it's really important to acknowledge. I all I when whatever I do with for instance, when we do like research and we create personas and we create all that stuff, you know I just really want people to realize that you just don't take it for granted. Don't go like, oh, now I get it, because you don't. So just say I don't. So whatever you do, start with I don't know. That's such a simple thing, but so difficult for people to start with. So just start with I don't know. That's great, because then everything's possible for the flow, and you're open. You're listening. You don't know. Instead of you say, well, no, or even if you know a little, no, it's just start with I don't. And that can be such a relief, but that's so not in our culture, because you're paid to know. So it's like,
Exactly, exactly.
right. And
And
so again, and before you know, you start calling yourself designer
and
because you know
Yeah.
something, right? And oh, sorry, yeah, Morgan.
and I was going to ask, like, what has created this, or what has created this spark or sustains this spark in you? Because like Arna just said, we're paid to know. We're kind of the at least the states kind of pays you more money if you're a specialist or you're an expert. But you're talking about writing, about drum circles, about using these indigenous ways of embodied thinking, and bringing in all of these different frameworks or approaches or all of these different things to essentially what kind of sounds like be curious in new ways.
Mm.
And so what is kind of like, yeah, what is, and you talk about, of course, integrity and
Well, you can make life easier when you go like, I'm a designer, I have a design toolkit, and I do service design because that's the trend, and that's it. Instead of going like, listen, there's this whole thing. So what you need to drive, I think you need a drive somehow to say no. There's more. There you can look at it from a different angle. It's a way where we think about having sort of this leadership aspect of who you are. You don't have to. So
yeah.
you don't have to do this.
Yeah, I
Did you know?
mean,
Did you know that?
We're glad
I
that
mean,
you do.
Victor, you don't have to. You can keep it simple, man.
it's,
They'll pay
that's
you
great.
anyway.
Countercultural. Yeah, let's do it. I love it. I think leadership is another example of a term, a concept that can mean different things in
Hmm.
different worlds,
Yeah.
right? So for me, the job of a leader is not to lead, right? For me, the job of a facilitator is not to facilitate. Now, I just mentioned an example of me coming into a community to facilitate something, but actually, I wasn't actually there to facilitate. I was there to give them a taste of a different way of practicing, strategic decision making. And if they liked it, they would continue on without me. And I left, guides for them, to learn how to facilitate. But I was giving them an experience so they can see if there's something they wanted to move forward with. So when I'm working with a group, it's not to say that, oh, you're anti-white people, you don't like anything Euro that comes out of Europe or the West. And no, I think the difference is that with a pluriverse, right, there is a space for these types of ways of being and doing. The main point is that no one way of being and doing dominates. So there's nothing wrong with Eurocentricity, right? That's a particularist approach from a particular area or part of the world. There is a problem with Eurocentrism, right? Where this is the standard. And if it isn't this, then it's not research. If it isn't this, it's not design. If it isn't this, it's not correct. That's more of the problem. So when I am working as a designer, because a lot of times I've learned the most in doing these kinds of projects as a community member. But when I'm in the role of a designer, right, and I'm not leading the process, I'm not choosing the methodology, I'm not the one facilitating and running everything. What ends up happening is the ways that the community members go about resolving or addressing or designing just comes out of how they would normally do it because I'm not taking control. So it just rises up quite naturally. It's not like I'm forcing it or, yes, there are cases where I've worked with communities, communities will say, well, actually, we don't know. What do you think? And when I talk with other designers, I always tell them it's so important that you have a hugely diverse array of methodologies because otherwise you're going to bias them to problem-based, need-based, deficit-based approaches. But there
Exactly.
are so many, so you have to know all of these because if they don't know, you want to present them with lots. I have a project right now working with Haitian immigrants, and I'm in the coaching role. I'm not the communities. I'm just there, and they can use my Western methods, but it's a pull. They pull it in when they want it or when they need it, as opposed to me kind of leading and deciding. And so you end up with all kinds of ways of doing the work that we do that are just very, very, very different. So I don't know if anything sparked it necessarily. It's just stepping back and not being the one to choose the methodology and letting it come out of the ways of being from the other people.
But if you look
Mm,
back, I mean, was there a moment? Because maybe when we ask about the spark, maybe it's there. Is there a moment where you became aware that that is the thing that you're doing, or is it that
yeah.
you be
What's your origin? I think of like the moment in Spider-Man where he gets bit by the spider. And
yeah? When did you get bit by the
when
spider?
did you get bit by the spider?
Oh gosh, these are really tough questions. I don't know. So origin in terms of doing it, I don't know. My guess is that there was a mixture of reading and then my my worldview, the lens through which I read something. So I remember in 2007 or 2007, however you say it, the Gates Foundation paid a bunch of money to IDEO.org to create a toolkit.
Hmm.
because the Gates Foundation said, if we take this human-centered design or design thinking out into international development, and specifically they work in global health and global education,
Mm.
we could change the world. This is it. This is the magic we need, right? Of course, that didn't happen. It wasn't enough. There are all kinds of problems with design thinking or human-centered design, and we could talk about that. But they created this toolkit, and I originally started in doing work in other countries, like in international development or community development as well. So I remember I had the toolkit, and there was somewhere in the toolkit, I have to go back and look at it, where it said, "Oh, you should gather people and do design with people." They might have treated it like a method, like an activity in and of
Mm.
itself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I look back through it, I'm like, it doesn't look. How did I get? But any worldview, growing up in the family I did, I somehow interpreted that to mean the first thing you do, and I've looked back, it doesn't say this, but the very first thing you do, the only thing you do is gather people together,
Mm.
right? So then
Right.
even the thing of like, we're going to choose this project and we're going to do this. Now even if you do it that at that point, you've already made some decisions without them there. Because
Yeah.
if you gather people together, I don't, I try to tell designers, I'm not telling you to hide your true intentions. You can be open and honest and transparent, like, hey, I think this is something we should work on, or I think this is an issue, or I think this is a really big goal that we should go after. But you're always in this process of renegotiation because they too can say the same things and
Hmm.
share, and then we're figuring out what we want to work together. But for some reason, the way I interpret it is gather people together, then we start everything: framing, scoping, deciding, choosing methodology, all that kind of stuff. So I still would not have used the language, the words that I'm using today to describe it, but that is
Mhm.
when I started. And when I read something there and I interpreted it in a particular way, given all my history and background and the worlds that I grew up in, that I inhabit, that's kind of how it started. But since then, because I've had people ask me before, and I go back and I look at it, it's like, I don't think it says how I understood it, but I don't know why it worked
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is a
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic or not misreading, but a fantastic interpretation of something. Yeah.
Well,
What?
and unintended use is one of the the main kind of ways we innovate, right? So
Hmm.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to do project for Nokia, and they had a whole design team looking in Africa actually looking at how people actually use their phones
Mm-hmm.
because they use them in ways they could not predict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that actually sparked a lot of innovation as well because it's this unintended use. So actually
Mm-hmm.
it is the best. That's how things emerge. That's, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, that's where I go like, that's a little chaos. That wasn't
Mm-hmm.
about, it was so this is where the designer should not come in and say, no, 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 no. That's not how it's supposed to be, you know, because that makes sense because it's actually, it should just spark something. I think the best kind of ways of helping these things happen, we're having maybe whatever you call it, if whether you're a facilitator or whatever, is by giving you options that you can then apply in a way that you feel comfortable with and makes sense to you, because otherwise we get, because I've been part of workshops, so many of them that just go through those motions like this, we're going to do like whatever, the 6 steps or the double diamond or the thing, and it's meaningless, and nothing comes out of it, and it's because you don't really understand what you're trying to do, and actually your whole idea of, oh, get the people together, it's like, of course you should. It's just that I think designers are often scared of people because they would like that, but then it becomes like, oh no, they have opinions. And although we seem to feel like they were very inclusive and all of the diversity, but in a way, this is, I think, also maybe what you meant with facilitation and leadership is you are actually, you're way too much in control of what's happening, and you're not really listening. You're really not really empowering people. And when you're saying, I give them options and they take what makes sense to them. I mean, yeah, but that's letting go. And leadership, in many kind of cultures, leadership or worldviews, if you will, leadership is not about letting go. It's about managing things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think
Mm.
letting go is really difficult for us. Again, back to control and back to,
Yeah.
I want to know what the outcome is, and because I get paid for this, the whole system doesn't allow me to let go.
There is an underside though to unintended consequences, so unintended uses. So I want to say it's a big area in ethical design or
Mm.
design ethics is trying to predict, because there's real harm that can happen when people use things in different ways.
Yeah, sure.
And so we do try to think about that as well. So there's a negative side sometimes.
But there are unintended consequences all the time. I mean, I think this is where the systemic design came from. This idea of we have to understand sort of how, when you change a little thing in the system, you know, something somewhere else is also going to be affected. What is it? Can we predict that? Can we see it? Or at least be aware of that? So I use systemic design or this systemic approach a lot to kind of make people aware. Actually, I use that also as an exercise to show people that there's something, maybe not exactly what you just described, but we use sort of, you know, I ask people to kind of get up, like when we would do like sessions with workshops with groups of people, I ask them to get up and then, you know, think about two people in the room, just keep them in mind and keep your distance exactly the same to these two people. And then they sort of they start moving around. Okay, so and after a while, maybe there's balance. Often something actually just keeps on moving and moving. But if I let them then stand still and I just move one person, someone else in the back will start moving again, and then the whole thing starts, you know, moving again because it affects everyone in the end because everything is connected. And just to show them, like if you're a designer or a changer or something, you make something or you whatever you do, if you're a teacher, you're teaching someone to behave differently, it will affect something else somewhere. You know, don't be blind to this change. You know, again, change blindness. Don't, you know, be aware of this. And I think that we need people like yourself who I think, and I think that this is also what Colin talked about when he talked about Ma and this whole idea of sort of this space in between, right? So this negative space in art, you call it the negative space, sort of that thing that shapes actually the things that the things basically. It's the nothingness that actually is around everything, which actually makes everything. That makes no sense anyway. That thing there, which is in between, is where, you know, we need people. I think that's where you are, because you can step back and say, hey, you know, you have all these worlds and you can look at them and you can say, I'm going to blend this, or I'm going to use my, now literally you said, well, I'm going to put on my, you know, my Western kind of American head here, and then I'm going to use my, you know, my people's head, and then I'm going to, you know, that kind of, you can shift, but you can see them and you can blend them, and you can offer them to others. You can say, hey, what about, you know, put this, or I have this in my backpack, or I have this thing that I can use. And I think I call that the sort of that a space in between people who are there, and in a way, it's an awareness of it that you're not only part of one bubble, but it is sort of scary place for a lot of people. It's that transition space for a lot of people. It's like, oh, I'm not part of anything now. And I always say, no, this is the place. This is
Yeah.
the place. You just don't know that you are in the place. This is where you see all the others who they are stuck. You are actually, and
It's like a butterfly. Like you just,
yeah,
okay,
and
I'm
I'm
going to
making
bring this really interesting tool to you, and you can decide if you use it. And I'm going to
that's a nice metaphor,
go over here and see what's
right? Does
Yeah,
that
possible
yeah.
and
does that
observe.
make sense?
Yeah. It's a different way of being, as opposed to I need to resolve every crack, you know, every gap. It's saying, what if the way to find ourselves is to lose ourselves, to live in the cracks, to become comfortable with that, and to allow that to be an expression of what home could mean. You know, like it makes sense to me, but it's a different way of being. It's almost an ontology of of no, I don't even know how you say that, of no, of wandering, of no nomadicism,
Yeah,
etc. So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
yeah, but
Yeah,
I would say it's not normal, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
not
exactly.
normal here in the West. Let
Yeah,
me put it like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And I think
yeah,
I'm really curious because of course they said like that of course COVID made people really reflect and think about things in a different way, but that we're starting to see kind of what they're calling like a spiritual awakening, which of course is then tied to your state of being and how you move through the world. And a bit like the Santa Claus example, right? Whether you believe in it or not, we all have some sort of relationship to it. And I'm really curious how that unfolds and how, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I have a problem now because I want to talk to you forever.
Okay.
But And there's so many things that because I'm looking, we haven't talked about, because you work for the coolest companies, and people who listen to this podcast, and it also, for us, it's like, I need to mention that because that makes our podcast look cooler, but we haven't. And we already, it's already been a very long talk. So, and I really, really enjoyed that. And you kind of inspired me and made me think, and you gave us, again, language that I didn't know before this conversation. And I think that is so important, because language is sort of shapes our reality too. So, and once you start sort of using similar words, even though we're from totally different worlds, but still, it kind of, these are connectors, and we can talk about it, and
Mhm.
that's why we use these words. So I love that, and so that's why I wrote down this ontological anthropology. I'm like, wow, I'm gonna kind of think about that for a very long time. The nature of being, or the way of being, all these this yeah, I love that. It's it's so important, and it's so important for I think, for creative, what I would call the creative leaders, or the facilitative leaders, the people who kind of show you options, the people who live in that space in between, who can say, listen, I look at it from a bird's eye view, and I can see all these things happening. And that's also a design function. I think that's also design. You're designing on a different level.
Mhm.
And I think we need those people, because those are the people that kind of show us options and things that we aren't aware of, that we haven't even thought about. And because we take things for granted, we go like, this is the way it's always been. And, these are the things we will always have. And what we have now is sort of better. It will never disappear either. Like, right. So, because, we're like always stuck somehow. We're like, this is the end of it. These are the companies we will have forever. And this is but no, it's not. And so we need people like you to say, no, actually, I see all these other worlds out there as well. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I would add, part of the way, I mean, this is not specific, not only my people group, there are others, but when I think about our ways of being, one of the words I would say is we have relational ways of being. We're really big into relationality. So I would be remiss if I didn't also say, because I want to pull it away from the idea of the individual creative leader. We really think
mm,
about collective or relational leadership. I would take a type of relational collective creativity any day over the most creative single individual. I don't have to worry about that creativity burden or the
Mm.
onus of responsibility, because it's spread amongst so many people, and the collective is very, very creatic and
is
wise.
this why when you were talking about that project, that you brought in, the whole, the whole group of people that you were designing for, you brought them all right at the beginning of the process, you kind of included all of them? Is that maybe because that's so normal to you? Whereas my
Yeah,
Western, because I live in a very individualistic society,
yeah,
right? I don't even know my neighbors. I mean, I know them a little bit, but not really. And
Mm.
I think that's a huge difference,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, we come out, I mean, coming from the West, one of the big components of our ways of being is viewing the world as objects.
Hmm.
I'm here, you're there, that thing is there. Even knowledge itself is an object.
Mm.
So then how do you know something if it's an object out there? Well, you have to go to it and somehow get it to come to you. And so then that leads to if you keep going up the tree, it leads to methodologies that extract. That's just the way it is. So then I have a lot of I have projects. I have a project right now where we're using what we call relational design. And relational design has different meaning. People use it in different ways. So I specifically, when I say it, I don't mean designing in relationship, designing with relationship, or designing for relationship. I actually mean design as relationship building. Like, I'm not
Mm.
using any kind of known design methodology. We're not using a design methodology. We're using relationship building methodology. And then out of that, knowledge emerges, design emerges, and we don't have to worry about any of that. But all that to say is that it, it's that comes out of the group of people that work and have more relational ways of being, and so it was quite natural to do that. And so you could ask me, tell me the biggest issues or problems or difficulties facing this community. This is a community of parents or caregivers of students of a particular school. I could tell you every single one of them, and I had never done an interview, an observation, a survey, or anything like that, because I am in vulnerable, healthy relationship with a diverse spectrum of people. And in those types of relationship, information is shared, right? So knowledge then, or ignorance then, isn't the absence of knowledge, it's the absence of healthy relationships through which knowledge flows. And so again, this comes out of a different way of being. And so this process or methodology kind of came out of that. But yeah, that's why we bring people together. They know more about their situation, and our collective creativity is greater than anything that I can bring.
Yeah. And I think that phrase healthy relationship is the, maybe the overlooked element for a lot of our well-being as a species. A healthy relationship. That's cool. When you look towards the future, what do you see on your radar? What are you excited about?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know if you mean the future of design or just future things that I'm doing. So I learn the most when I am doing community projects as a community member. So not as a designer, I'm a community, and we might even bring in a professional, right? But I'm functioning in the role of community. So I always love that aspect and that dynamic and learning from that. So right now I'm looking forward to hopefully, I don't know when, I want to say maybe next year sometime, but if not early 2026, having a book that can share some of this ways of researching and designing, radical participatory design with more people. I definitely prefer ways of disseminating knowledge that are not based on the written word, but it does help to have a book that reaches places where someone hasn't met you at a conference or seen you give a talk, etc. So I'm excited about that. I have a series of papers. I sometimes write academic papers on the ways that we do, like people in my community do systems practice or systemic design that come out of relationality. So, in systems, some people will say, well, you have to work on information flow. Some people say it's about resources. Some people say it's about relationships. Some say it's about power, et cetera. And we found that for us, fundamentally, the key biggest thing that affects everything else are relationships. And so it's really interesting that systems people all about how things are interconnected and related, but oftentimes we work on the different nodes of a system, and we work on the linkages between that. We take the relationality all the way through. So yeah, I'm excited about that. It's a series of 4 papers, and I hope to turn it into a book one day. Probably called, working title right now is Black Liberation Futures Design, and then the working title of the first book is Radical Participatory Design. But trying to share more, not saying I'm applying systemic design approaches to our community problems, but I'm sharing ways that other people who do systemic design, in my opinion, have done with the professional systemic design community, as hopes of maybe there are things that they could learn. Cross-ontological conversations, basically. You could think of it like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, you've probably already had this insight 12 years ago, but when you can get people involved in radical participatory design, you're not just perhaps coming up with a valuable outcome, you're also then changing those linkages and connections and relationships, and perhaps even the person themselves. So the possibility for impact is so much, it's multiplied,
Yeah.
it's exponential. It's really
Jacina Vink is, I think, in the Netherlands, or no, maybe not somewhere in Europe. Sorry,
sounds Dutch.
Jacina.
It sounds Dutch.
Yeah. Well,
Somewhere.
Jacina grew up in the States, but is a professor. Maybe it's in Oslo. I don't remember.
Okay.
But Jacina Vink talks about individuals. This connects a little bit, Arna, to what you were saying and what you just said, Morgan, but talks about individuals as systems in and of themselves. So just everyday relating is a type of intersystemic designing, which I think is really, really quite beautiful. But yeah, I am pushing, I work in the federal government of the United States. I published a policy memo on the true way to achieve equitable outcomes in many of our services is to use radical participation. And so I've presented it to people in the White House and the Office of Management and Budget, and I'm working on building a program that will begin to set up some centers. Again, I don't know if all this will get approved, but I'm really trying to do what we call policy entrepreneurship to get the government to make it easier for different service designers in government, whether you have that title or not, to work in this way. So I'm super excited about that. It's also tough. It's hard, and it may not happen, but I'm going to keep doing it because I think when I've been able to do it in government, it's worked very well. But I'm trying to move outside of the service level. Like, I don't just want to affect my service. I want to affect other services and products at other parts of my agency, but also across the federal government. And so I'm trying to work on a policy at the government-wide level. So that's super exciting for me too.
Yeah, she's Josina Fink. She's in Oslo at the moment.
Oslo, yeah.
Yeah, she's working for AHO, the school, Oslo School of Architecture and Design. So, but her name is very, very Dutch. Fink is a bird. So.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to look her up. That sounds really, really interesting. Thank you so much. I'm gonna end this. I have more stuff I want to talk to you about, but I won't, because nobody will ever reach the end of this episode. Otherwise, I was just gonna have to ask you back, especially when you get closer to your book. Just keep us posted about that, because I think that is
when you change the government, that is be rooting for you big time over
deep
there.
time, deep change over deep time. Yes. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So, but yeah, for now, thank you so much for your inspiration.
Yeah, thank you, Victor.
Really, really, really interesting. I'm going to really enjoy editing this episode, because I have to listen to it all over again in detail, which is nice always. But this one I really, really look forward to. So thank you so much for this talk.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Really nice to meet both of you, and I'll be connecting on LinkedIn.
Yes, looking forward.
Yes. All right.